Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. This is Mujeeb Kazi, and you're watching VOK TV. I'm absolutely honored to have a very special guest with me today, Dr. Robert Hunt, who is a professor of Christian mission and interreligious relation, director of Global Theological Education, Perkins Schools of Theology at SMU. Dr. Hunt, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for giving your time to us.
Oh, I'm very happy to be with you, Mujeeb. This is a great honor to be part of this.
You have done a whole lot of great work, and I want to start off with congratulating you for receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from Islamic Society of North America.
Well, thank you very much. I was surprised to receive it. I think so many people have done so much more, but I'm happy to have made my contribution.
Certainly, and we are very honored and very proud of your contribution towards interfaith harmony, understanding of different religions. Well, let me start off by saying this. What triggered you to go into theological education versus so many other disciplines that you had on your plate?
Well, I would say two things. One is that I came from a family of educators. My father both taught at a university and was the president of a college. So was one of his brothers. My mother was a teacher as well. So we really come from a family of educators. My grandfather was the president of a college, a university. And so we come from a family of educators. That's always been something I enjoyed doing. I felt like it was in my blood. When I was a young man, I made a conscious decision that I would work within the Christian church. I felt like it was a place that where young people could be upheld and supported and given a good grounding in faith in God. And so I was a pastor for several years, but ultimately felt that my best contribution was in educating pastors and preparing people for Christian ministry.
Excellent. Based on your academic research and education and travel around the globe, what is the main hindrance having a harmonious relationship between the other religions, particularly Islam?
I think the greatest hindrance is simply ignorance. Um, Most people only know their own community and their own faith. This is especially true in the United States. Um, but more importantly, they tend to take what they've heard about different religions, and we'll talk about Islam specifically, from the culture that is around them and from the resources that are around them. And for a very long time, Islam has been misunderstood within the West in general. Um, it was Islam was seen as an enemy of Christianity and Christian civilization for centuries. Um, in the 19th century, Muhammad was somewhat romanticized, so there was kind of a romantic view of Islam and of Arab culture in the 19th and early 20th century, the sort of Lawrence of Arabia period. Um, but very little that was factual, and so people tended to go with their prejudices, and many of these prejudices were built in to the Christian religious teaching.
So, was it done by design by certain groups, interest groups, or was it something was a failure on the Muslim side?
Well, there's always room for failure all around, but the reality is that it suited the polemical needs of both religious and political leaders in West and Europe to have an enemy, and an enemy near at hand was Islam and the Islamic world. Um, of course, it has to be said there were political and military conflicts between these different civilizations over trade routes, over land, and that contributed to this. Uh, it's also true that for much of this period, there were places, and we could mention Spain, Andalusia. There were places in the Middle East where Christians and Muslims and Jews all lived together, and they knew each other. Um, but for most of Western Europe and later the United States, um, it people fell prey to propaganda. Okay, and that said, particularly in the years prior to 9/11, I think it's also true that the Islamic community, maybe particularly in North America and Europe, did a relatively poor job of interpreting itself to others. It was either an aloof community that did its own thing, or in some cases, in its effort to show its importance within American and European culture, made some rather bombastic and frightening claims.
So if we fast forward ourselves and looking at the given situation around the globe at this time, what do you suggest that the Muslims should know about Christianity?
Well, it's interesting. I was just in a conversation. I'm part of a project that involves an Islamic institution, the Islamic Seminary of North America, the Jewish Theological School in New York, and my school. And in that situation, we had a discussion just yesterday about this very topic. What are we doing to not interpret ourselves to each other? And I think the probably main thing to understand about Christianity is that there's no such thing. There are many different Christians, Christian denominations, Christian groups. They see the world differently. They see Islam differently. And they themselves are in the midst of change. So there's no monolith here. There's no Christianity out there. And it's important to realize that. No one speaks for Christianity. The closest thing would probably be the Pope, who speaks only for the Roman Catholic Church, not the Reformed churches, not the Orthodox Church. So yeah, to understand that there's a variety of Christians, many Christians and many different Christian experiences, and the majority of Christians do not live in the United States and Europe anymore.
And what should Christian know about Islam?
I would begin with the diversity of Islam, the different cultures into which Islam spread, right? And with an understanding of that wide diversity, and therefore that we cannot make generalizations, I would say the next thing that Christians need to understand about Islam is that they need to get a clear view of both the Quran as a revelation and of Muhammad as a prophet. These are the two things that, in my experience, have been most distorted within the Christian world, is who really is Muhammad as a man in his cultural context. What do Muslims believe about him and not believe about him? And of course, the Quran. What is the Quran, and what is the Quran for Muslims?
So the very basic understanding of the religion.
Right.
So why do you think, I mean, it's more of an academic question, that why do you think that most Christians, particularly, but even some other people, still believe that Islam is not a true religion? Why do you think people think so?
That's a good question. So, one of the things that happened in the beginning of modernity in European Western culture was that we began to define religion in a very specific way. This word religion, by the way, was specifically the word that designated the Roman Catholic Church. Before 1600, nobody used the word religion for Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or anything like that. We invented the world religions by applying this word religion to other religions. And as soon as we did, of course, any so-called religion that didn't match up to the Christian standard of what a religion should be was not a religion. Now, or could be claimed to not be a religion, right?
Mhm.
This is kind of particularly silly with Islam because Arabic actually has a word, agama or ugama, that precisely means religion. It's not, and it refers to Christianity as that, and Judaism as that, and Islam as that.
Mhm.
So we should accept that. But there's one other thing that happened, and there was a tendency to believe that true religion was not political.
Mhm.
Okay. And to spiritualize everything. And of course, once you say that true religion is not political, then this would allow Christians in particular,
Mm-hmm.
right, to exclude Judaism because that was about laws, and to exclude Islam because Islam is clearly about laws and politics and structures. So, in a sense, we created a definition of religion that was intended only for us. And then we could look at everybody else and say, well, you're not religious because you're not us. Um, but I think it's the political dimension that most people object to. They say Islam is about politics, it's not about religion. And by that, what they mean is religion isn't political.
I think probably because Islam teaches a way of life through the
Right.
holy scripture, and people try to live by it. Unfortunately, not one country we can exemplify around the globe that actually lives up to those standards, and that has been misconstrued by many for their personal agendas.
I, I think that
And that's where the major discussion takes place on the street, that the Muslims, particularly in America, are blamed that they're going to bring the Sharia law. So in your understanding, what is Sharia law? I'm just trying to understand from your perspective, when somebody talks to you in your classroom or in a session, that these Muslims are trying to bring the Sharia law. What does trigger in your mind when they use this terminology?
well, it's very interesting because the, the term Sharia, of course, uh, originally means a way or a route or a place to a watering hole. Um, the better, if we were to think of Sharia in other terms, it's much more closely aligned to the word Torah in Judaism, which is the sum of all of God's commands and desires for humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I always have to remind Christians that Islam has another word for laws, which is fiqh. Um, so that it's a bit of a tautology to say Sharia law
Mm-hmm.
because they're the same thing. I think the big misunderstanding here is that there is some body of laws called Sharia, commonly called Sharia, that Muslims not only live by, but want to politically implement in the societies where they live. And um, and so there's this threat of Sharia law. Sharia law is going to take over. Everybody's going to have to live by Sharia law. You hear this, right?
Right.
And um, this is where we need some education, right? I mean, first of all, in understanding that historically, within Muslim societies, Jews and Christians kept their own distinctive religious and moral laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that and I would say that's the first thing to understand. The second thing is that Muslims, according to Sharia, Muslims who live outside of a Muslim state or a Muslim polity are obliged to follow the laws of the land that they live in.
Correct.
And the only exception being that they should maintain their laws about worship, ritual purity, and morality. Um, so, uh, I'll be honest. I'm convinced that we not only have ignorance, that we have intentional efforts to harm the Muslim community, primarily by Christian preachers and pastors and politicians who use this word Sharia to try to create fear.
I 100% agree on that, and we are, have seen myself and our community victim of that
Yeah,
politically.
sure.
So I'm going to move on to the next part of our discussion, and which is how to bring the interfaith harmony amongst different religions, particularly in Christianity and Islam and Judaism. What practical steps Muslims at this time in age should take, particularly because they are the one who are at the receiving end in terms of not playing their role in educating others.
Yeah.
That's where we have failed miserably. So, what practical steps should they take to educate and bring this understanding that there would be some theological differences, maybe 10%, I would say, but 80-90% of the moralities, the ethics, and living together, is loving each other, loving your neighbors. comes from all religion. That's what they teaches us.
Yeah.
So what should at this time Muslims, particularly Muslim leaderships or a common man out at the street should play its role to bring that misconception under do?
So, well, first of all, let me say that at least in Dallas and Houston, the two areas that I know pretty well here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
Muslims have already done a very good job of trying to create some outreach and to educate non-Muslims about what Islam is, what Muslims practice, to invite non-Muslims into the mosque
Mm-hmm.
to see what this is all about. And I think that's a terrific first step. I'll be perfectly honest. Um, we need to see each other as human beings in our places of worship, and to hear firsthand what what real individuals believe. So that's, I think, the first thing. I do think anything that can foster dialogue, that can invite people to come in to open dialogue, is going to be useful. The question is always, what should the dialogue be about? And I'm a very strong believer that the most useful kind of dialogue begins with, what are the things that we can do together that are good for our community? So um, the theological issues take education, and I think that's important, and dialogue can serve to do that. But it's often frightening for both Christians and Muslims who feel like they're not experts to be invited into dialogue to talk about things when they just want to go, well, I think my pastor needs to talk about that, or my imam, you know. But we can all talk about our own personal stories, and we can talk about our aspirations for our whole community and the things we want for it. And I think that kind of dialogue, to seek it out and to create opportunities for it, are some of the best ways. I'll add one other quick thing about this, and this is just my observation being back in the United States for about 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the the Muslim community, at least in North Texas, has been very, very good about inviting Christians and Jews to come to their mosques and others, right, and to learn. Um, I think that probably the kind of outreach that says to Christians in particular, can we come to you? Can we come to your Sunday school class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we come to your youth group and talk about Islam and who we are? That may be necessary, because it's hard to pry people out of their church, right? Or to create a third venue. And you and I were together in a kind of a dialogue group just a couple of weeks ago, where you move off site. You're not in a Muslim space, you're not in a Christian space. The Interreligious Institute in Houston does a terrific job with this. They have a huge dinner for where people gather and do interreligious dialogue there. I think this would be a big help. I think the Hizmet, the Gulen movement, you can call it, the Turkish Muslim community has done a pretty good job of trying to foster this kind of dialogue around civic issues. I think that kind of work is going to be helpful.
Excellent. Dr. Robert, it was an absolute delight having you on the show. And I think the takeaway for today's discussion is get to know each other, create stories. If you don't have a story, create one.
Absolutely.
I think that's very powerful. And I'm going to go with that today. And that brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being part of the story that you're telling.
Absolutely. Thank you.